Hi everyone! In this video I will show you my process of preparing a full background illustration for Live2D animation. In case you don't know, this is a type of animation involving the separation of a static image into parts and animating them by stretching or moving, without the need of frame-by-frame animation or 3D models. So my goal is to create a looped animation for a starting soon screen for streaming. This is the sketch that I prepared. I made sure to already separate different parts to plan ahead what will be behind the parts that will be moving. I also added a 10 pixel margin for the objects on the edges of the image. In this case, we want some simple idle animations like the head and hand moving, the flying pet, hanging plants, and leaves swaying. There are some things which will have to be animated in post, like eyes closing, and it's going to be a long process, but the end result came out pretty cool, so stick around to see the finished piece. Once everything is planned, I can begin drawing. I decided to start with the character, which is going to be the hardest part. I will draw the head separate from the body to be able to animate the head swaying. This also includes dividing the hair into different parts to achieve more natural movement. It looks a little confusing right now, but will make more sense at the coloring stage. The most important thing when making an illustration for L2D animation is underdrawing. Normally when you draw a static image, you will only draw the things that are visible. But in this case, you have to draw under the parts which will be moving to avoid creating any gaps in the image. Make sure to create separate layers for each part and put them in the correct order. I recommend sorting the layers into folders if you're like me and use multiple layers when coloring. Except for the hand, I don't want the rest of the body to move, so I draw it all on one layer for now. Also use some border effect layers to draw the small accessories, but they will be merged to the rest of the body at the end. Technically there could also be some movement added to them, but I decided not to overcomplicate the illustration. Drawing the arm was kinda tricky, since it had to be divided into two parts, with one being under the body and the forearm being above it. That makes it possible to create arm movements without the arm getting covered by the body. Now the last part is the tail, and I was also considering prepping it for animation, but decided against it, since it would require dividing it into multiple parts, and again I thought it would be too much. So I'll just separate some of the floating parts and halos for some small movements so it doesn't look too static. Before we continue the video, I want to introduce you to the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare, the largest online community for creatives with thousands of online classes and members. The perfect place to look for inspiration and explore new skills while honing the ones you already have. During this autumn season, I'm spending a lot of time inside and at home, so it's a great time to sit down and focus on learning and developing as an artist. Skillshare makes this very easy with its classes on many subjects such as graphic design, animation, film production, and many more. Finding the right resources is simple thanks to the learning paths, which are curated sequential class collections which help to keep track and stay motivated. The class that I've been enjoying recently is How to Start and Keep a Daily Sketchbook by Mike Lowry. It's a very fun class for artists at every level which teaches how to develop a daily sketching routine and helps to get inspired and excited to draw. You can also get started on learning new skills using Skillshare. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. Before working on the rest of the line art, I will color the character. And here you can really see how the head and hair are separated into different parts. I try to make the gradient of the hair consistent across the separate parts. Don't get too confused while coloring. I first blocked out the strands with a contrasting grey color, then changed it into the character's actual hair color. The rest of the character was very simple to color, so I'll just show some snippets of it. Here I'm drawing the halos that I want to be animated, so they're on separate layers. The one above the head is simple since it's just behind the character. The ones on the tail had to be divided into the section above and below the tail. So now I will be moving to the flying pet. This one had a more complicated division compared to the character, to create a more realistic floating animation. Both of the ears were separate from the head, and I also had to divide the body from the limbs. Of course, the wings, tail, halos, and other accessories were also separate. It's time to start working on the background. First I have to figure out how to keep the margin. So I made a 10 pixel black border, making sure that the area outside of it is the standard video size. All the background layers which won't be animated are below the layer with the border, while the objects which are going to be moving are above. So they're a bit overdrawn outside of the image. Make sure to draw the background under the things that will be moving, even if the area is covered on the static image. I use border effect layers for a lot of the greenery in this illustration. To speed things up, I also used my custom leaf brushes. If you're interested in making these in Clip Studio Paint, you can check out my previous video. Even though most of the background will be just one layer at the end, I recommend dividing it into smaller sections, so you can easily work on specific things. Here I put the curtains and some other objects on layers above the floor and wall layers. Everything outside the windows is transparent, so the sky and city can also be separate. Now I'm also working on some of the elements of the background that I want to be animated, like the leaves and hanging lanterns. Border effect layers are really useful in this scenario, since I don't have to line art and color in every individual thing and can just draw the shape. Alright, it's time to move on to the coloring. I try to make the colors in the background match the character so everything looks cohesive. In order to make the character look like they exist within the environment, I first created a layer on multiply mode and used light brown to add a shadow over the character. Then I add lighting on a layer on add glow mode. Repeat this process using the same colors while coloring the background. This way I have the same ambient lighting on the characters and the environment. First started with normal daylight just to get a neutral feel, but near the end I changed the colors to sunset lighting. Because there were so many separated layers, it was a lot harder to manage the colors, since I had to adjust every object separately. This was the biggest problem around the time when I changed the lighting to sunset. So I had to create a lot of different color correction and different modes layers for every object. So I definitely recommend having a clear idea for the color scheme at the beginning, when doing illustrations for Live2D animation. Personally, I'm very used to tinkering with the colors all throughout the process while drawing, but in this case it was pretty problematic, so this is definitely something to avoid in the future. Because there's so many composition layers in this scene, it was kind of difficult to balance everything out. There's the city outside the window, the interior, two characters, various objects in the foreground, and many leaves. I had to use a lot of lighting effects to make sure things don't look too muddy together. It was definitely a trust the process kind of project. Once I was satisfied with the flat colors and lighting, I started adding shadows to the background. To do that, I just create a layer on multiply mode clipped to the base color layers. When doing shading, I use colors other than grey, usually light brown or purple. Throughout the process, I had to keep switching the visibility of different layers to make sure I color and shade everything properly under the objects that will be moving. In order to add shading and lighting to the character, I put all of its layers into one folder and created layers clipped to the folder to easily draw across all the separated parts. Later, when I was cleaning up and adding more detail, I copied and pasted the layers for each separate part. This was the easiest way for me to make sure the shading and lighting were consistent, but feel free to let me know if you have any better methods for that. After that, I just shade every individual part separately. I also changed the color of the line art so it doesn't stick out too much. At the end, I will merge the colors and line art layers and paint over it so everything looks clean and blends nicely. Okay, so this is the moment when I changed the colors. I didn't include the footage since it was pretty long and boring, but I pretty much just changed the shadows to be more purple and the lighting more orange, and a lot of overlay layers. I'm just working on coloring the leaves so they don't look so flat. That's pretty much the whole process, and I'll show you the end result. Okay, so this is what the final file looks like. As you can see, everything is in separate layers. So all the layers are numbered, so when you put them into the animation program, they will be in the correct order. So the leaves will be on top and nothing will be out of place fully. Here you can see how the character divided, a lot of hair layers. And this is what the margin looks like. As you can see, the things that are on the edge of the drawing are above the margin and go to the end of the canvas. Okay, this looks kind of crazy, but yeah. So, yeah. Now it looks like finished. So this is what the finished animation looks like. It was done by my animator friend who used After Effects for Live2D motion design, and the waterfall was animated frame by frame in Photoshop. I think it came out pretty cool. Let me know what you think, and thank you for watching. Bye bye!